Ladies and gentlemen, we are here as family in a special context of the recent developments in negotiations of a more permanent solution to the humanitarian issue of Gaza. As the interests of both sides, Israelis and the Palestinian fraction in Gaza, arise to find a solution to Gaza, in addition to the interest of Egypt, who shares our border, we are vividly aware of a new, concrete opportunity to reach a diplomatic agreement of peace. We know about the UN Special Envoy Mladenov's plans for Gaza. We know about the White House drafts being written for a permanent solution for Gaza. And we know about the Qataris and the Arab states' willingness to initiate plans for a lot more than humanitarian aid for the civilians in Gaza. Of course, we know that also the EU initiatives for Gaza are being taken place. Let me be clear, we as a family do not want to condition food or medicine from the families in Gaza. We share the hardness and pain from this conflict because we bleed out of it each and every day. We have bled each and every day in the past 4 years, and for 4 years my family has been constantly intimidated and terrorized by Hamas in order to make us pressure our government to release thousands of convicted murderers of Hamas from Israeli jails and to bring victory to terrorism. Hamas is holding the body of my brother, abuses and disgraces it in every possible barbaric shape as a political tool and as a means of propaganda. For 4 years, we as a family have witnessed one-sided approaches towards the situation in Gaza, also from this building. But it is unjust that almost no initiative or solution regarding the Israeli captives has been offered from this place, which claims the title of Good Guardian of the international humanitarian rights. For 40 years, families in Israel have been suffering from terrorism, and especially the most brutal type of terrorism towards the families. This is the kidnapping terrorism. And now it is clear that not Hamas nor the PA can prove to be credible of their willingness to solve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza if they are double-standardly holding to the most inhumane acts against the international humanitarian law. It is the moral competence of this institute to ensure the unconditional retrieval of my brother Hadar, Sergeant Oron Shaul, and other live Israeli civilian captives in Hamas hands as part of the package of a broader humanitarian solution for Gaza. This institute should be leading the call for real and just solution for both sides. Declarations should be made, drafts should be written, and action should take place. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Sue, for your clear message to the European Parliament. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Kevin Cotton, former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, founder and chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and pro bono legal counsel for the family. Floor, Professor.
Thank you, Father. I want to first express my appreciation to you and your colleagues for convening this hearing, and to Leah and Sir Goldin for your moving and compelling remarks, which I believe have not only touched us profoundly in a human way, but have made the compelling case for the return and repatriation of Hadar's remains as clear and as significant as can be. We are approaching the 4th anniversary of the murder and abduction of Hadar Goldin in violation of the United Nations mandated humanitarian ceasefire, Leah Goldin mentioned, also brokered by the US and supported by the EU. But for 4 years now, the foundational humanitarian international law obligations continue to be violated in every particular. First, Hamas has continuously withheld any information to the family, the loved ones, about the situation of Hadar Goldin, considered to be itself a foundational violation of international humanitarian law, as the International Red Cross has put it. Second, They have refused to repatriate the remains of Hadar Goldin as they continue to taunt the family. Again, as international law and the Red Cross have expressed, a standing violation of this most foundational principle of international humanitarian law. Third, they have continued in all their conduct to affront foundational principles of human rights and human dignity and freedom of religion and the like, and providing for a proper burial of the remains of Hadar Goldin. And finally, and this is often ignored, the Palestinian Authority became a state party to the Rome Statute, to the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court contains in the Rome Statute a provision with respect to the protection of what they call outrages on human dignity, being the refusal to provide information or repatriate the remains. Yet the Palestinian Authority is a state party to the International Criminal Court. It purports to represent the Palestinian people. It sought and received admission as a state party because it held out that it represents the Palestinian people. Yet it has done nothing to remedy any of these violations. So they too become complicit, yet the international community has yet to address the fundamental accountability of the Palestinian Authority to address and redress these violations. So let me conclude by saying we here, individually, collectively, as parliamentarians, members of civil society and the like, particularly in terms of appreciating the foundational principles that underpin the European Union and the European Parliament, we need to undertake certain specific actions as well, and I will close by just outlining them. One, we need to make representations to the Palestinian Authority so that they implement their obligations with respect to addressing and redressing these international humanitarian law obligations. Two, the European Union and the European Parliament is anchored to its credit in principles that speak pervasively throughout the institutional work and documentation of the EU and its Parliament, of the promotion and protection of human rights, of compliance with international humanitarian law, of combating impunity. The case and cause of Hadar Goldin engages each and all of these foundational principles and values of the EU itself. Third, in this context, the European Union Foreign Minister, among others, should be asked to include these concerns and violations of international humanitarian law in her dialogues and representations in these matters, and particularly with respect to representations to the Palestinian Authority. Fourth, the European Union, amongst the primary donors to the necessary humanitarian assistance that is needed for Gaza, and Sur has outlined this much better than I could state it. But the European Union must therefore, for purposes of the humanitarian assistance and relief, also factor in these international humanitarian law obligations into the necessary humanitarian assistance package for Gaza. Finally, all this is about what the EU has called, and the international community recently in the G7 meeting in Quebec, in my own province, has called the need for a rules-based international order, of the imperative of compliance with international humanitarian law obligations, of combating the culture of impunity. As trustees of international humanitarian law, we have both an individual and collective responsibility to see that these international humanitarian law obligations are both respected and enforced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kotler. I hope that you will be so kind to also to put it on paper what you have said to us as an institution. That should be very clear that it is on paper. That we know to very strong message in our obligations. Thank you very much. Dear all, now we proceed with the statements first of the co-host, and if you allow me, I start. Dear family, Goldin, love transcends death. This precious life lesson we learned today from you, Dr. Hadar Goldin, Professor Hadar Goldin, and Hannah's twin daughter, Zur. Life transcends death. Together you are fighting already for years to bring home the remains of your beloved and so very talented son and brother, Hadar. Dear family, we cannot enter, because we are human beings, we cannot enter your pain. This unbearable pain of the loss of your child and brother, the immensely inhuman suffering of not being able to lay him to rest in a safe place close to home. The love for Hadar gives also the inner strength to pursue. It is the burning love that brings you here for him, your son, your daughter. We as members of the European Parliament will heartily support and join the family in their heartfelt cry to bring Hadar home. We call upon everybody in the European institutions and the member states of the European Union and the international community at large to contribute to the humanitarian case of Hadar Goldin in the strongest possible way. Yes, the international community should now step up. It is high time that Hadar comes home. If there will be a solution, for Gaza soon, the return of the remains of Hadar must be part of it. The basic principles of deep respect for the dignity of life and death are universal and should underpin anything that will be agreed. Is it too much to ask by mother, by father, to receive the remains of her child? This very question should haunt all those involved and the international community until the very day that this injustice is brought to an end. Dear Leah, dear Sima, dear Zur, indeed, your love for Hadar transcends death. We wish that soon, very soon, and we pray that it will be brought home to you. Thank you. Now I want to proceed and give the floor to my dear colleague, Mr. Wistersen.
Dear all, dear family, dear colleagues, thank you for showing up to show this broad party support for this humanitarian effort. I would say when we negotiated the last text on Gaza, I think it was a major accomplishment both to include your case and also the case and other similar situations for Israeli citizens kept in the Gaza Strip, but also to condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization. And I think we as Europeans should recognize that terrorism is never a legitimate political weapon. And terrorism is never the fault of the victim, it's always the fault of the perpetrators. And therefore I'm glad that so many have decided to show up. I'm glad that the European Parliament have taken a very strong stand in this case in its last resolution on the Gaza Strip. I'm glad for the very multiple party support that this event have received. And I hope that as many of our colleagues as possible will sign the declaration to bring back Hadar to his family and to his rightful burial. And I hope that we could also go together in a common question to the High Representative, Ms. Mogherini, for her to come out stronger from the Commission side and abide by this principle of humanitarian law and of international order. And I don't think that Europe can continue to be a credible voice when it comes to international order and humanitarian and human rights if we don't pursue cases as this. So I hope that the High Representative will join in together with the European Parliament and do all efforts to bring back Hadar. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. It is a very moving and touching evidence that you've been able to provide us with here today, and I hope that we, in a very humble way, will follow up the great suffering and pain that you have suffered over the last almost 4 years.
Absolutely, Alice, absolutely. Now I go to my dear colleague, Mr. Pilla from Romania, EPP, for his statement.
If I may, Chair, and with colleagues' agreement, I have to leave at 2, and so I will be going very shortly. But I just wanted to say, as a British Conservative MEP, you have our full support, and I apologise that I have to leave the meeting early. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like first of all to thank my colleague Pat Belder, the initiator of our meeting today. As the other co-organizers, I supported this initiative and wanted to join in this effort for reasons that I would explain in a few minutes. But I would like first of all to express my deepest sympathy to the family of Hadar Goldin, who came here today to give us such a personal and moving account of this very tragic situation. I think that we in the European Parliament cannot remain silent in the face of this intolerable situation. I think we cannot and should not remain indifferent faced to this humanitarian case. I'm a parent myself and I'm deeply moved by this. I cannot even begin to imagine the suffering Hadar Goldin's family has been through, being unable to mourn properly and lay to rest his remains. Being unable to visit your child's tomb is indeed, as Mrs. Goldin has stated previously, against human conscience. I understand their feeling of deep injustice. No parent should have to go through this. I stand in solidarity with you, and I think we should do all we can to bring his body home. I hope that our meeting today will help build some pressure at the level of the international community so that this can happen. We do indeed have a legal and moral obligation to pressure Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to return the bodies of Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul, the other IDF soldier whose remains are still being held by Hamas, as well as the 2 Israeli civilians being held in Gaza, Avera Mengistu and Hisham al-Sayed. In our last resolution on the situation in Gaza adopted in April, we have been very clear on this request to free these 2 civilians and to return the bodies of Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul. We should now insist that our request is respected, and I think all of us here are committed to continue insisting upon it. Hadar Goldin was abducted and murdered by Hamas in violation of a UN-mandated humanitarian ceasefire. I'm very grateful to Professor Kotler for the legal clarification he has brought to this discussion. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, missing persons, regardless of their status, soldiers fallen or captured during the fighting, or civilians taken captive by an adverse party, are protected by humanitarian law, and intentionally withholding information about missing persons is acting in violation of humanitarian law. Families have a recognized right to know the fate of their relatives. We, who in this House insist on the respect of international humanitarian law, we should insist that it applies to everybody, including Hamas. Speaking precisely of Hamas, I'm glad that our latest resolution expresses in very clear terms what Hamas is, a terrorist organization, and condemns his acts of terror directed not only against the citizens of Israel but also against the people of Gaza themselves when they dare to oppose it or when they are used as human shields. As Ms. Goldin once said, people of Gaza are indeed taken hostage by Hamas, and this is also a thing that is unacceptable to us. I wish to express my rejection of the strategy used by Hamas, consisting in regarding human beings or their remains who deserve a dignified treatment as bargaining chips in pursuit of its policies. Finally, I know that during the UN meeting last December, Mrs. Goldin has emphasized that she received enough expressions of empathy but has seen not enough action. I share your frustration after such a long term, and I express my hope that all this will not be just empty words. We do indeed need to find a dignified solution, working with the international community and insist on the idea of accountability. Someone must be held responsible for the killing of Hadar Goldin, for the withholding of his remains, and ultimately for this intolerable situation that you have been forced to live with for such a long time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleague. Now I move to my dear colleague, Mr. Peter Niedermüller. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's not easy to talk about this case, and I think so we are emotionally very much touched and very much moved. But I think so the biggest scandal is that after 4 years of this tragedy, we still have to fight for bringing back the body of Hadar Goldin to Israel. And of course, we can feel your pain, but I think so it's not enough for you. You are here in the European Parliament, and the European Parliament is first of all a political body, and you put the question is right, what can we do? What can be the political action to help you to bringing back your son to Israel? And I think so there are some very important issues which may be a little bit common sense, but we have to emphasize once more. First of all, we have to make very, very clear that Hamas and Hezbollah, they have nothing to do with freedom fight. They are terrorist organization. And they are the biggest barrier in the peace process on the Middle East. And I have heard many times, and I can believe it, that the life conditions in the Gaza Strip are very tragical, very bad. But I think so the main reason of that is Hamas and Hezbollah. Because they are the organization putting money and invest money in terror organization and not in education, employment, healthcare, and whatever. This is the one thing. And the second thing is, I think so, that we have to think in the European Parliament and rethink in European Parliament our politics on the Middle East. As far as I can see, or from my point of view, and this is the personal point of view, this is a really, really one-sided politics we are following here in this Parliament. And I think so we have to change it. And this is not a question of being left or right. This is a question of commitment to Israel. And if we are not ready to accept that we can close this house. This is our duty, let me say, to have a balanced politics on the Middle East. And I think so this is a very, very tragic example why we need much more balanced politics in that case. Because there are so many exhibitions in this Parliament with really tragic pictures of dying Palestinian children and whatever. And of course they have a very, very strong emotional power, these pictures. But we have to see the other side of this whole tragedy as well. And we have to see this case and other cases, and we are not ready really to talk about it. So I think so, I absolutely agree with my colleagues. We have to do all possible political pressure on the European Commission, on the Council, and also on the Parliament, not only in this concrete case, but of course this is one of our priorities. But generally to speak, we have to change our politics, and we have to understand if we are following this one-sided politics as we follow, we will never do anything in priority to have peace in the Middle East. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. And now I want to give the floor to Mr. Sani. I hope that I pronounce your name well.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, sir. So, thank you, boss, for the invitation and organizing this meeting. And it is really an exceptional honor and privilege for me to meet members of the Goldin family and really to pay tribute to the heroic humanitarian effort to retrieve and bury Hadar's remains and in dignity. As Democrats, as humanists, as politicians, it is a natural duty to support your international appeal to retrieve your son's remains to be treated with full honor and dignity. This is not about politics, and we are not going to solve the Middle East conflict here and now. But please be assured that your courage and persistence is a great source of inspiration to all of us in this Parliament, although of very different party affiliations, who care for the security of the state